Welcome to Ecologic for the month of January 24, wintertime. I hope it's the last of it. We've had enough of rain and cold weather. Now we need to see the sunshine and start to seeing the blackberry blossoms come out and welcome spring. Anyway, fortunate to have Bob Hammack, who's an attorney. He's the legal advisor to the Dredge the Vermilion group, who's been involved in dealing with the flooding on the Vermilion going back to 2016. So we've been at it for a long while, and we have made some progress and headway. We've made some very important changes that certainly affect water levels here, and there's a lot more that has to be done, but certainly some things have been done that will make a big difference. There's extensive projects in Lafayette to deal with retention, building retention ponds, digging these lakes and ponds. They're all over the parish. I think we have spent about $160 million on this drainage. We don't know how much effect this will have because we cannot begin to equal with dredging ponds what nature has provided in the whole Dredge the Vermilion ecosystem. And that's what we're going to be talking about, the Dredge the Vermilion impacts and what happens in bringing fresh water down to the farmers, the rice farmers of Vermilion Parish. That's the principal goal of this whole project. It was authorized by Congress in 1966 and involved an extensive project in building pumps on the Chaffelay River, 5 200 cubic feet per second pumps, giving us 1,000 cubic feet per second. That's pumped into a canal that goes across the entire western Chaffelay floodway, from roughly Krotz Springs all the way to the levee at Bayou Catawba, right at Highway 190, right above Highway 190. And that puts it into Catawba, and Catawba drains to the Bayou Teche 10 miles upstream, and the Bayou Teche drains into the Vermilion, and they can make sure it goes to the Vermilion because they have a dam on the Bayou Teche, so very little of the water can go over that dam. Most of it has to go down to Vermilion. In fact, during low water periods, about 70% of the entire watershed from Alexandria on down, Simpsport, that whole area drains through the Vermilion. And the problem with that is it carries a lot of sediment, and it doesn't carry the sediment at enough velocity to carry it out to Vermilion Bay. It's only moving a little more than a mile an hour, and so it ends up filling the bayou. When you fill the bayou, when the flood comes, the bayou can't pass the flood, and it ends up in your house. So that's a very simple. We've tried to initiate a plan to dredge the bayou. That hasn't happened. Vermilion Parish opposes it, and that has been a real problem in terms of political influence. That political influence has basically stopped the dredging of the bayou. One of these days, the navigation interests will come in, and the Vermilion is one of 13 navigable waterways. The Corps is responsible for maintaining navigation. The Calcasieu Channel, Freshwater Bayou, the Intracoastal Homer Nav Channel, the Mississippi, down the list. But Vermilion is entitled to the same navigation rights that the Chaffelay River or the Calcasieu River or the Homer Channel enjoys. So hopefully navigation interests will require that it be dredged to accommodate navigation all the way to the General Mouton Bridge here in Lafayette. And so it's our hope that that will give us a legal opportunity to resolve the depth of the bayou. The Dredge the Vermilion was authorized in 1966. a $50 million building program, built the pumping station and pumps it into across the Shafly Basin in a canal, and that empties into Bayakatawla right at Highway 190 and drains down to Vermilion Bay. Now, to actually operate this system, the Louisiana legislature passed the Vermilion Freshwater District Plan, and it taxes property owners in 4 parishes. That's Vermilion, Lafayette, Iberia, and St. Martin. Although the project mostly is in St. Landry Parish. And St. Landry Parish has membership in the Dredge the Vermilion, but they don't have a vote. And so it's essentially 4 parishes. Now, of the funding, it's about $3 million a year. About 65% of it comes from Lafayette Parish. So Lafayette has the biggest economic stake in this whole plan. Dredge the Vermilion started operating in 1985. It has had some great benefits, and one of the benefits was to help the pollution in the Vermilion. One of the goals of Dredge the Vermilion was to move the water from Lafayette to Vermilion Bay in a shorter span of time. In low water periods, if you dropped a plank in the at the Pinhook Bridge, it would take 48 days for it to make it to Vermilion Bay, mainly because of the tidal impulse. At times the water's going down, at times the water's coming back. And so with the Dredge the Vermilion, you drop a plank in the Vermilion at Pinhook Bridge, it reaches Vermilion Bay in 48 hours. And that's a distance of about 48, 50 miles. So the goal is to give it a 1 mile an hour flow. And that's pretty much what it does.
Harold, so you can start with this thing. Basically, my interest in this, in the watershed, commenced in 2016 with the Great Flood of 2016. And that's not an exaggeration to call it the Great Flood of 2016. Because for our area, it was an epic event. 7 to 10,000 homes. I hear different numbers, but thousands of homes flooded. Lives were disrupted.
Yeah, 5,400 in Lafayette Parish.
Okay, it was just how many? If you had 1,000, it'd be way too many. So we started looking at this issue, and we could start where we are now today. We could start in 2016, or we could start with where we're trying to get to try and do as many things as we can do to alleviate flooding. And there are a number of discrete, different things which we have sought to do, and we continue to seek to do, and some of which we have already done. So let's start with first of all, I met Harold in August 2018 at the Light Center, and we had this big meeting, and all the parish presidents were there, and the Corps of Engineers was there. And everybody came and expressed their love for one another and their good wishes and how we were all going to work together. And this was supposed to be the first time in the history of the state when all the parishes in a watershed would actually cooperate and work for the benefit of each other. And it was a very kumbaya moment, and everybody was all happyed up and da-da-da-da. Well, as is human nature, didn't take long for people's, parochial interests to sort of take over, and we ended up kind of having some disagreements, i.e. what Harold talked about when we wanted to dredge the river. Vermilion Parish got in the middle of it and said, well, we don't want Lafayette's water. Well, that's a misnomer, because water's water. It doesn't know political boundaries. It doesn't have a political party. It doesn't, it just goes where it goes, and the water in the watershed affects everybody in the watershed. And that concept of trying to work together to control it is paramount in trying to control flooding to the degree that we can within the watershed. So, what have we gotten done since 2016? Well, we got the Vermilion. We didn't get the river dredged, although numerous promise upon promise was made by the former administration, by the city, parish government, by the council. Everybody tried and tried and tried, and it all got shut down. It never did go forward, and we're still working on that, and maybe someday we will get it done. But we did do other things. We got the bayou cleared and snagged, which was important, I think. It helped.
Yeah.
They pulled a ton of wood out of that bayou. I went up down and watched right off the Camellia Bridge where they were pulling out gigantic trees.
Barge loads.
Right, and so that seemed to help. And the one good thing, although that it was done in a very sort of questionable way, was that they got rid of a lot of the spoil banks at Cypress Island, which, if you're familiar at all with this whole issue, when the river is really ripping and roaring, eventually it flows backwards. And Cypress Island is 30,000 acres. It's Lafayette's natural retention area. So what would happen was, and I noticed this at my house on Beverly Drive, right off the river, when we would have a flood event, and this was like in 2016, in 2017, 18, 19, we had a couple of them. The only one that got water in the house was the 2016 flood, but the other three, the water would flow backwards, and then it would come into my yard, and then, your wife and your kids are all panicking, going, "Oh my God, it's gonna hit us again." But it didn't, luckily. But what you noticed was the water would come up and it would go right back down real fast. And that's because I think our group believes, Dave Dixon and some of the smarter guys in the group besides me believe that the water bows up when it can't get into Cypress Island, but eventually it does get in when it gets over the spoil banks. So that we've yet to see or have any confirmation of our ideas about whether or not that's working, but it seems like it might. We've also, and this is very important, and Harold and myself and Dave and others have been monitoring it, but they cut a big culvert, not a culvert, but a big opening on Lake Martin Road, which runs through the middle of Cypress Island Swamp, to open up a lot more of Cypress Island Swamp for retention when the river is running backwards and we're experiencing a flood or potentially experiencing a flood event in Lafayette. So, and that's related basically to...
And we really have to thank DOTD and those folks that realized the road was a dam and isolated about 7,000 acres of retention. And so putting that opening also brought the cooperation of St. Martin Parish, where they cleared all the stream that goes into that crossing. They cleared all trees and brush and replaced the culverts that blocked the flow, restored the flow of connectivity to the Vermilion when it is backing up and flooding. So this my guess, it would, had we had that in 2016, we'd have easily lowered the water in Lafayette 1 foot to 2 foot. And that's just a wild guess, but that makes a big difference because of the 5,400 homes flooded in Lafayette Parish, 73% had 1 foot or less of water in it. So that could make an enormous difference. And this was done at very little cost, amazingly very little cost.
And that brings up a segue into a number of things. First of all, one thing that's really important is what Mr. Harold said about being 70% of the houses had less than 1 foot of water in them. We don't even know. Perhaps the opening up a little bit of Cypress Island by knocking down the spoil banks, the opening up of the other half by putting the cut. It's not like a culvert. It's a big opening to let water flow back and forth. Dredging and pulling out the trees. These are all things that work in increments.
And we have to add another thing to that. St. Martin Parish, following a recommendation of the Corps in 1993, connected the Cypress Island Joday Canal to the Teche below the Keystone Dam, which drains it right into Lake Falls Point. Now that's really important because that drain will make an enormous difference in a worst case flood. Right now, before that was done, 100% of the water had to drain through the Vermilion Bayou 55 miles to the bay. Now it can drain to Lake Falls Point, which is essentially the same as the bay. The Lake Falls Point and the bay have about the same water levels. It's basically sea level. It's an enormous, over 150,000 acres of wetland swamps that it goes into. So this is those things are very important. Each one lowers water than Lafayette, and how much will be determined by actual events. But the guess is that what has been done around Cypress Island, the spoil makes, the computer model showed a lowering of 2 to 3 feet. One model showed 18 inches, 2 feet. That's very significant. The opening of the Joe Day Canal, the connecting Cypress Island to drain to the east, that could be as much as 2 or 3 feet. So you start adding these things up, and the threat of flood has been significantly lessened.
But the thing is, floods are like snowflakes. No two are the same. They can come from the north, they can come from the south, they can come from tons of rain, they can come from a hurricane. You don't know. And so you need to have as many different features of your watershed that you can use to take care of the water, depending on where it comes from and what it's doing. Fundamentally, our organization, which was started by Harold, believes that the way to deal with flooding, with all due respect to the engineers and all the people in the city that spent millions of dollars digging holes and got us into all kinds of litigation over whether the property was properly taken, and we ended up with liabilities. The answer isn't in digging artificial ponds. Those things may help. They may help slow the flow of water to the river and therefore have some limited effect. But where you really get the bang for your buck is by taking advantage of what nature provides us. And it provides us natural retention areas like Cypress Island, like and especially the ones to the north, like Bayou Cocodrie, Thistlewaite, Waukesha, Darbon Swamp, and Cypress Island Swamp is also one of them. Those things are gigantic retention areas. The problem is, and Harold can go into this because he knows more about it than I do, but the problem is that we keep those swamps to the north of us flooded, okay? So what happens when those swamps are all flooded, the river's at 8 feet, and you get 8 inches of rain? Well, basically, an inch of rain in Lafayette translates to, by rule of thumb, about a foot rise in the river. So you got 16 feet of water in the river. If, like, and Harold can talk about this too, when we had Hurricane Barry in 2019, they shut the pumps down, they drained those swamps down up there in Avoyelles, Evangel, and St. Landry Parish, so they were available for retention. But the river was at 3.5 feet.
The lowest it had been in 38 years.
Exactly. And we got more rain in 2019 for Hurricane Barry than we did for the Great Flood of 2016.
We absolutely did. And we had two other problems. We had a significant storm surge that didn't happen in 16, and we had a high river. 2016, August 16, the river was at 8 feet. During Hurricane Barry in June of 19, it was at 20. It was at flood state.
Right.
So we couldn't drain into the swamp. We had a storm surge. We had more rain in the entire system than we had before, especially north of Opelousas, north of 190. We had, in the flood of 16, we had 12 to 14 inches. In Barry, we had something like 16 to 24 inches in that whole system, which all drains to us. And it's interesting that the U.S. Weather Service and USGS models the computer models of the Barry flood predicted an identical flood at 17 feet at the Surrey Bridge. And it was 17.1 at the Surrey Bridge for 16.
And if you all remember, Rob Perillo, who I think is a really good weatherman, based on what happened in 2016, maybe was not aware of these. Nobody was aware of it, really. All we knew was we drained these swamps down. They were ready to take water. But he said, before Barry, he said, if you flooded in 2016, you're going to flood as a result of Barry.
You got a 99% of
99% chance, and we didn't flood. That was because we started with a lower rate. And one thing that my simple little mind grasp, because Harold explained it to me, is that it wasn't just the fact that we lowered the river down to 3 feet that kept us from flooding. It was because these large retention areas up to the north of us, Byakacodri, Thistlethwaite, Waukesha, and Darbone swamps, they were also drained. So that water didn't come down on us like it did in 2016. And the
computer models were 5 feet off the actual. They expected to go to 17. It went to 12.1.
Yeah,
which flooded no one.
But our group has a Harold and Dave call it the BSFF method. Models are okay, and they're useful for some purposes. But the way you figure out what's going on is you get in a boat and you go out and you look around at what's going on when it's raining. So we call it the BSFF. We use Boy Scouts, farmers, and fishermen to figure out what the water's doing. And that's the real world, and that's the way things work. So this is another segue, Harold, into kind of what we're trying to do. What we want to try to do is the Teche Vermilion Freshwater District. I moved to Lafayette in 1985. I was 31 years old. Now I'm 69 years old. And in 1985, I had no interest in flooding or even knowledge or even was even conscious of it. But in that year, they formed the Teche Vermilion Freshwater District. And it was formed to provide fresh water to farmers and stuff in the lower Teche Vermilion watershed, because apparently they were having problems getting water because of the building of the Henderson levee. I don't know if that's an exact replication of what the
That's
Corps
pretty much the case,
the Corps would say, but it's ballpark. It's right.
The levee, historically, Chaflar River got high in the spring and brought floodwaters down the Teche and Catawba all the way down to Vermilion to the rice farmers who needed it. But you built the levee and you cut that all off, so you don't have the water supply that historically was prevented by the flooding of the Chaflar River, going back to the levee was finished in 1935.
It was built at a cost of $50 million to pump water down over to Byakacodri, down the Teche, and down to Vermilion to make sure all these parishes or farmers and people on the west side of the levee had water. But we live in a dynamic world, and the world has changed a great deal since 1985. It's going to be very politically, but and I don't, I'm probably going to step on some toes, as I am prone to do. But the Teche Vermilion Freshwater District has become largely unnecessary because we don't really have a problem with providing water on the west side of the levee. We have a problem with too much water, and Harold could go into this. He knows a lot more about it than I do, but we could easily provide water for the water that's provided by Teche Vermilion Freshwater District through Bayou Buff. Is that right, Harold?
That's through Bayou Buff.
Just pumping it just letting it run right across
Right from the
levee
Red River
from
in
the Red River
Alexandria.
naturally, and Dave and all these guys can explain that. The world's changed, but unfortunately, you have these sort of vested interests really that form as a result of money, and the Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District is sitting on a fund, a surplus of money to the tune of $32 million, which has been paid by these four parishes that are members of the Freshwater District, okay? Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District. And the guy that runs it, I'm not going to say his name because he'll probably, get mad. I don't care if he gets mad really, but anyway. And he's got this money. He got a lot of political influence. He gives jobs to people that, as far as we can tell, they really don't do too much. But he's got this vested thing up there with all this cash, and he likes it, but it ain't good for us. The real rub of the thing is that Lafayette Parish pays 60% of the money to the Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District. So after this TV show's over, for those of you that aren't watching the football game, pull out your tax statements for the last, since 1985, if you've had property here, if you have had property during that period, and look at how much money you're paying every year to the Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District. It's a substantial amount of money. And Lafayette is funding it, and we're receiving pretty much zero benefit from it. Nobody wants to get rid of it because it's money that this guy's got, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into making accusations about that. But anyway, that's what we want to do. And without casting aspersions, what we would like to do is to expand the raison d'etre, the purpose, the operating manual for the Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District to include flood control. Okay, that's not their mission right now. Their mission is to provide water and keep Bayou Catawba at flood stage and keep Buffcatcogre, Thistleway, Waukesha, and Darbone swamps flooded, which is dangerous for us. Well, they need to, at least if they're going to continue to exist, they need to take into account when we're going to have a flood, and they need to lower those water stages in those areas.
As was done in Barry.
As was done in Barry. They're already doing it, but if you call and ask them to do it, they say, oh, no, that's not our marching orders from the Corps. So, in essence, what you're saying, if you want to be cynical, is, so your marching orders are to keep the waters way high so we all flood. Well, that's just great, isn't it? Anyway, as my daughter would say.
But the important thing in this is that the plan, which was devised by the Mississippi River Commission, needs to be revisited in terms of flood, in terms of environmental impacts. Look at this project. If you flood bottomland hardwood swamps, you're destroying wetlands. The wetlands are super valuable for wildlife and for all the benefits. The wetlands, we have a whole program with the Corps that protects wetlands. You can't damage wetlands without getting a permit from the Corps. So protecting wetlands is super important. And if you flood them continuously, they are impoundments and not wetlands. And that's a big problem with the whole system. It has enormous impact on fisheries because throughout the system you have multiple dams. You got two big dams at Catawba. You have the Keystone Lock. That's a dam on the Bayou Teche that forces all the water down to Vermilion. You have the Ruth Canal Lock Dam. It's just a float dam. You have in the Laurelville Canal, you have another big floodgate. All of these are controlled to keep water going down to Vermilion, which had its benefits. But the source of water from the Chafla River is only a maximum of about 1,000 cubic feet per second. Well, the watershed has changed so much that we don't need the pumps to provide that. That could come from the Red River through the gate in Alexandria, the Bayou Rapides Gate, which is presently being done. It can come from many reservoirs. The Tocodra reservoir, the Lake Cocodra, is 7,000 acres. It has very poor drainage. You can't drain the lake down, which is a major problem. That's going to be visited by DOTD. They're going to probably put a gate that will give us 7,000 acres of retention that could be lowered during a flood and then released when we need it. We're talking about 70,000 to 80,000 surface acre feet. That's very, very significant. So if we manage the water better, the need for Dredge the Vermilion and the pumps, and by the way, to run the pumps 1 month has an electric bill of almost $200,000. It's very, very expensive. When right now because they built the Bennett Johnson Reservoir, it raised the water in Alexandria 20 feet. So Rapides and Falls Parish can't drain into the reservoir anymore. It has to drain down to us. Well, that's just additional water in the system. The Bay de Glace gate was closed during the flood of '73. That's a watershed of 274 square miles that used to drain into the Chapel River at Simsport. That's been closed. So now all that water, and that's a watershed, all of Lafayette Parish is 251 square miles. This is more larger than all of Lafayette Parish, now drains to us. These changes have had a big impact on how much water is coming down, and of course that's real bad for us in a flood. So that makes the retention area provided by nature so much more important. So what we are saying, and 5 parishes have drafted I guess a letter that's being sent to the Corps of Engineers in Vicksburg, requesting that the plan, the operation plan that was originally designed in the '60s, be revisited and brought up to date to deal with the possibility of flooding, to preserve wetlands, to preserve a lot of, farmland that has been lost to this flooding. Rice fields that can no longer be planting rice. And there have been lawsuits that have been filed on this, and the woodlands that have been flooded, people have been compensated for. They were not compensated for loss of farmland because there's a 6-year opportunity to bring that issue, and the litigation was beyond the 6 years. So we look at a long list of this flood of '16, which we think could have been significantly changed had we lowered the water levels as was done for Barry, has had an enormous impact on us. It changed the flood maps. It brought a lot of homes into flood zones, and along with that, an impact on your insurance rates, your flood insurance rates, which has gone out the roof, as I understand. In fact, to the point where it almost has a big impact on whether you can buy a house or not. You're paying more for flood insurance than house payments almost in some cases. So this flood issue, which we think could have been averted or been lessened enormously, the whole significant part of that plan needs to be revisited in light of what has happened. We made, just looking at the environmental impacts of this problem, it goes a long ways. The fact that you're keeping wetlands flooded all the time, that impacts an area, a sensitive area like the Cicely Wildlife Management Area. That's there to preserve wildlife, game, turkey, deer, rabbits, you name it. But those guys cannot exist. There's nothing to feed on the bottom of a pond in that whole system. So we look at the impact of the Keystone Lock. The Keystone Lock keeps the Bayou Teche at 10-foot elevation. That's way above flood stage. Flood stage on the Bayou Teche is around 8 feet. It's 10 feet in Lafayette. And so you're keeping Bayou Teche at flood. That forces all the water down to us when a real flood does come. It's already flooded. And so these things need to be revisited. 5 parishes asked the court to do that. this whole Dredge the Vermilion has significant environmental impacts, many of them very negative. The dams block the migration of fish. The canal that provides us water from their shaft line was a big dam across the whole west of shaft line floodway. And it not only blocks surface water, but it blocks the retention when we need to dump the flood into the Shafly Henderson Swamp. It limits how much can go in. And if you can't put it in there, then it has to come down to us.
One of the major misconceptions that I think people have, one of them is that they believe that if you move water, okay, north, south, whichever way it needs to go, you're dumping your water on me. If you live in St. Martin Parish and it flows up the Vermilion River towards Cypress Island, then Lafayette's dumping water on St. Martin Parish. If you live in Vermilion Parish and you dredge Vermilion, then you're allowing water to flow downstream, and Lafayette's dumping their water on Vermilion Parish. That is silly. Water in a flood only causes a flood when it gets impounded and dammed up behind things that don't let water flow. If water can move to its natural retention areas, which we advocate, it will benefit everyone. And it's not a zero-sum game where if you don't flood, you're going to flood me, and if I don't flood, I'm going to flood you. It just doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that that's how it is, and it's not. It's a situation, and anytime you have a flood, and I can tell you this from personal experience, when my house flooded in 2016, the water from the Vermilion backed up into my house, and I was sloshing around in that stuff for like a day until it went down. But you get exposed to it, and you wouldn't believe the rashes and junk that you get on your skin because of all the crap that's in that water. In other words, even on a residential level, it's an environmental and ecological disaster. And so these are things that are all a result of flooding. And like I said, they're incremental things. I mean, if we can get the Dredge the Vermilion Freshwater District to start helping us with flood control by shutting their pumps down and quit pumping the water when we're looking at a flood situation, whether it's a hurricane coming or a front coming. I mean, we live in a world now where you can predict the weather 2 weeks in advance, so we can take advantage of that. If we got a lot of rain coming, shut the thing down, let everything drain down if you can, and then we'll have a situation like we had in Barry where we dodge a bullet, but we don't, or we can have a situation where 2016 where we keep the Bayou Catawba at 18.5 feet and we get hit right square in the forehead by the bullet. It's our choice, and we need to keep doing things to incrementally help the situation. And we have a program that we believe will work, and you know the engineering firms and all the Tension Pond gang, they got their program. We think ours is a lot better, and I'd love to have them come in and we could publicly debate it. So anyway, Harold.
Well, one of the things that has been a problem in the whole system is that the elevated water levels blocks the flow of streams coming into like Bayou Catawba, like Bayou Darbar. And because there is no flow, the sediment going into it is filling it up. And that's what's happening in the Vermilion Bayou. The Vermilion was dredged at 11 feet. Right now it's probably, not today because we flooded, but at normal water level, the spots it's only 2 or 3 feet deep, right here in Lafayette. The main drain for the whole system is the Sharonton Canal, and it is totally blocked. It should drain into Cote Blanche Bay, and it can't because the whole drain, what they call the jaws, the Sharonton Canal is 200 feet wide, 40 feet deep, and then it crosses the intercoastal to go to the bay where it's inches deep. My small 16-foot flat with a 40 horsepower motor couldn't go through it. And so that forces water down the intercoastal. And of course, that can be produce a hydro dam on that. The Vermilion is filled in, the Bay d'Arbonne is filled in, the Charenton Canal is blocked from the bay totally. All those issues raise water levels. To fix the drainage to the bay would be less than $2 million. It was turned in as a project for the Coastal Restoration Program, and of course it didn't have support because the people who are driving that want much bigger projects, and the engineering firms are part of that decision-making process. They're not interested in a $2 million project when they can get a $50 million project. So that complicates our problems, filling in of the waterways. And that's only going to get worse. The Vermilion is not going to stop filling. It's going to come to the point where you'll be able to walk across in low water and low tides. So the environmental impacts of this whole thing are horrendous. The Keystone Dam is something that's obsolete. It was built in 1913, and it was built because they needed to maintain navigation all the way to Burbridge. And during low water, the Teche got too low, so they could either dredge the Teche, or the Corps' final solution was, instead of dredging and cutting down, in those days they only used bucket dredges. So they'd have taken a lot of oak trees down to be able to accomplish that, which no one wanted. People loved the oak trees along the Teche, and they didn't want to lose them. So the Corps' solution was, let's build a dam and raise the water without dredging. And so that's the reason it's there. And now it's become a major feature in the Teche Vermilion freshwater district, because if they took out that, then the water would go down the Teche rather than coming. And it's the same as the floodwater. It's just the Corps did a 1993 model of that issue, and they planned to take out the Keystone Dam deep in the Vermilion from 11 feet to 14 feet, and they would put the drain in to drain Cypress Island into Lake Foss Point. That has been done. The Keystone's still there. But that computer model 93 showed that doing that would lower water levels in Lafayette 6 to 8 feet. That's very significant.
Yep. So there's a number of things that can be done. One thing that Harold talked about, the Charenton Canal, well, that's at the bottom of the watershed. The top of the watershed is basically the Red River to Alexandria. That's how far it goes in terms of up to the top to bottom. Lafayette is probably kind of right in the middle, huh, Harold?
Yes.
So we're in the middle of this large watershed, and everything that goes on above us affects us, and everything that goes on below us affects us. And it's not just, 8 inches of rain in Lafayette, and that's the whole situation. It's much larger than that. And so now it may cause, if you get a big rainstorm in Lafayette, you may get some flash flooding, but you're not going to get the kind of flood we had in 2016, where the river literally backs up for days, inundates St. Martin Parish for days, floods houses all over Lafayette and Youngsville for, long periods of time.
In the watershed above Lafayette, towards St. Landry Parish, in St. Martin Parish, they were flooded over 30 days.
Yep. So they had it a lot worse than we did.
It's kind of interesting that to go back to flood stage at Perry and Abbeville took 4.5 days. The flood stage at Perry is 9 feet. It went back to flood stage. It went to 14 feet, so it was 5 feet above. So it went back to flood stage in 4.5 days. For Lafayette, Surrey Bridge to go back to flood stage took 31 days. And that's because Cypress Island filled, and it's very slow to drain because the openings in it were so small. And that's been improved. 3 major openings have been brought into play. One was the Lake Martin Road,
Right.
one is the spoil bank removal, and 2 is the drain into the Joe Day Canal east towards Lake Foss Point. That's going to make a very significant, very big difference in worst case floods for Lafayette.
So essentially what you're saying, Harold, is with the spoil banks being knocked down, and hopefully we did knock enough of them down, but apparently it did something. Hopefully. But Lafayette, when the Lafayette floods and the Vermilion River flows, quote unquote, backwards to Cypress Island Swamp. Cypress Island Swamp will fill up faster,
And drain faster.
but it'll also drain faster.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. You want water to move. You don't want it to be impounded, dammed up behind all these obstructions, okay? Because that's how you get the flood water out. And hopefully, if you're lucky, you won't flood at all because it's not going to stop and sit there and keep piling up. It'll go in and out and move. And so, I don't know. The detention ponds are. What do you want to talk about? What the benefits of those are, or do you want to just
Well,
leave that
I mean,
alone?
the ponds are very small in acreage. When we talk about Cypress Island, you talk about 30,000 acres, you could put 10 feet, so that's 300,000 surface acre feet. If you took all the ponds in Lafayette that are built and that will be built in the near future, you're looking at, if they're all empty, and by the way, most of them are full, but if they were all emptied, you're only talking about 2,000 or 3,000 surface acre feet. It's nothing compared to Cypress Island. I mean, it's what is it? It's not even 1%. So that's
A lot of money for a little bit of benefit.
You got about 150,000 acres of retention area in the Cocodrie Buff Swamp, This Way Swamp, Darbon Swamp, Waukesha Swamp, and you lower that 3 feet, then you have an enormous difference, and that's what occurred during Hurricane Barry. 7 days of no pumping drained those swamps 2 to 3 feet, but it's 150,000 acres. So, I mean, and it totally drained Cypress Island. Lake Charlotte went empty. There was birds there by the thousands. I paddled up there with a canoe, and it was really something to see the crawfish and minnows that were trapped in that receding water. But it emptied it. So we had, and normally we keep in 3 or 4 feet of water over the swamps in Cypress Island, but it emptied. And so altogether, all those natural retention areas being drained, and the north wind was helping us. But the fact the pumps were off, the north wind wouldn't have drained it by itself. With the pumps going on, it has still kept the Vermilion full. It would have kept all those areas full. And we can thank the people in St. Landry Parish that forced that issue, that they demanded that those pumps be shut off. That was a very great benefit to us. So it points to the fact that cooperation of the parishes are really important.
Yes.
How St. Martin Parish has done things that have an enormous benefit to us. The drain under Lake Martin is in St. Martin Parish, but the access to the drain needed clearing, which St. Martin Parish came in with all the equipment and dozers, cleared out the trees, fixed the culverts, fixed the dammed areas, the areas that they had kind of land bridges for the cattle to cross. Those were all taken out to accommodate access to those 7,000 to 8,000 acres. And 7,000 to 8,000 acres that you could put 10 feet of water in is an enormous amount. So we can thank those parishes, St. Landry Parish for being a big help. Louisiana Department of Highways, who realized that Lake Martin Road was a dam. They were rebuilding the roads, so there was an opportunity to fix it. A very small part of that budget, but something that we think will make a very significant difference.
It's a very dynamic situation, I guess, and that is to say that it's in a state of flux. I think that there are things that we plan on trying to do to make the Corps of Engineers or get the Corps of Engineers by hook or crook or carrot or stick to do more in terms of the Tertiary and Freshwater District, i.e. change their operating manual, and that may be done through an environmental lawsuit. Because, the thing about flooding and environmental desecration, they go hand in hand. If you're flooding someplace, you're destroying the environment that it's in. That's just common
exactly
sense.
right.
You're killing the fish, the birds, the plants, the squirrels, anything that lives, and you're killing
the trees.
and you're ruining people's houses, and they're fighting with each other because they got to come up with flood insurance rates are going up. It's just mass destruction of everything. So it really is an environmental as well as a social issue, and we haven't even talked about the social effects of it. I mean, flood insurance rates are going through the ceiling. And we're gonna get ourselves to a situation here. The government is. You hear John Kennedy talk about it all the time. The government is slowly raising the flood insurance rate, or trying to do it slowly. Sort of the old theory that if you drop a frog in boiling water, he'll jump out. But if you put him in a vat of cold water and you slowly turn it to a boil, he'll die in there. I don't know if that's even true, but that's a old wise saying that people use, and that's kind of the approach they're taking. But it's going to get to the point where people won't be able to afford to live here, or in a lot of the areas of the country that flood. So we need to come up with ways to address this that are effective, efficient, and economical. And taking $160 million and blowing it all on digging a bunch of holes, pardon me or excuse me for being too blunt, but I don't think that's how you do it. I think you find the cheap ways, you take advantage of nature's gifts, right? Yeah. It's a good word, Harold. That we get, and you can do it much cheaply and more efficiently. You don't do it by the government coming in and just throwing money at it and digging a bunch of holes that are probably going to be marginally useful. So
there's another big issue in this whole plan that was totally ignored, and the protection of archaeological sites throughout the area. This whole system affects hundreds of thousands of acres and involves dredging canals and all kinds of different aspects of manipulation of the landscape. But in that whole process, the environmental laws of the country demand that we protect archaeological sites. Terrebonne Parish has gone through that. They ignored that issue. Now they're having to go and inspect that entire levee system they built all through Terrebonne Parish to deal with the archaeological sites that may have been disturbed by their levee. This whole system totally ignores any archaeological protection.
We got a call.
I think we have a call.
All right.
You on the air? Can we help you?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, go ahead.
How many of these holes have we dug so far? And how many more do we have to dig to protect all of the flooding area of Lafayette Parish and Lafayette City itself?
There ain't enough holes in the world.
I think it's at least 10 have been built. Some of them are real large projects on the Bendel property near Milton. Homewood, that's the Homewood project. Some big projects towards Scott. A big hole at the American Legion. I
passed by the American Legion. Hold on. I pass by the American Legion every day of my life 2 or 3 or 4 times. And it's almost, it's 2/3, 3/3 filled with water already. So I don't know where that water is going to come from or where it's going to go. And is that how all of the other ponds are?
That's pretty
Yep.
much it.
Pretty
And-
much.
And you notice that one stays full. For retention ponds, they need to be empty if they're gonna work. So, thank you so much for the call, but we spent an awful lot of money getting there. I think if we could put a gate on Catawba and the Chapala River, that would be enormous help to deal with flooding in Lafayette, and it would be $3 or $4 million. So, thanks for the call. Yeah.
I think we're done.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, for
Thank you, Harold.
coming. We
For putting up with me.
hopefully we can get all these resolutions passed by the parishes to the Mississippi River Commission. It's their rules that need to be modified and updated, and it's our hope that that will make a big difference in solving.
Well, let's just finish up
environmental
with
and flood
saying
problems.
this: slow and steady wins the race. Keep pushing. Don't give up, because if you do, you're dead. So we're gonna keep going and keep